Hello, welcome to Woodworking for Miniaturists. I'm David Knight, and today I want to show you a salvage project of mine. This project represents the overlap between my miniature work and my history of restoring old motorcycles and a Model A Ford. You might want to consider some restoration work yourself. A person could spend a lot of money getting the many useful tools and power tools that are available for miniature work. Or you can equip a shop on a budget if you are alert to opportunities, which come in many forms. Back in my 20s, when I farmed for a living, I would make a trip to the dump whenever the detritus accumulated to the status of a truckload. During one trip to the dump, I spotted a Craftsman bench grinder someone had discarded. A bench grinder is a very useful sort of tool, and I didn't have one. I didn't know if I could make it work, but I was going to try. And if I couldn't, I would just bring it back to the dump. When I got it home and tested it, the motor proved to be thoroughly burned out. So I removed the stator and the rotor and just kept the arbor shaft and the housing with the bearings and the guards and the tool rest. And I rigged up an electric motor salvaged from a washing machine to spin the arbor. And I ended up with a useful grinder. Also in my 20s, I built the large gill-built bandsaw that I still use. Such kits were a way to enhance my shop at bargain rates. Sadly, gill-built no longer exists, but a few of those gill-built kits might be still around on eBay. When I did a search, I didn't find a complete kit, but I found a free downloadable plan, the one that came with the kit. This was from a site called Vintage Machinery, which looks like a good resource for refurbishing old tools, maybe for finding old tools. If you could source or fabricate equivalent wheels, bearings, saw guides, etc., you might be able to use such a plan to build a gill-built machine. Fine Woodworking magazine has featured dozens of articles on building your own power tools, and during its 20-year run, the Scale Cabinet Maker published many plans and instructions for homemade power tools, particularly for miniaturists. So check out those archives. Bargains can be found in junk stores, flea markets, antique malls, yard sales, dumps, and at the curb where they were taken out as trash. If people know you are a woodworker, they will recall that so-and-so has a thingamabob that he quit using and wanted to get rid of. I have been the beneficiary of the generosity of others on several occasions. My first wife's uncle had accumulated several hundred board feet of cherry and walnut in widths of 12 and 16 inches, in the expectation that he would do a lot of woodworking when he retired. Soon after that day arrived, he began to show signs of Parkinson's disease, and by the time I met him, he knew he was not going to be doing any woodworking. His old barn was falling in on the stacked wood, and he knew that it would soon be ruined. He told me I could have it if I could haul it away, and shortly thereafter I made arrangements to do so. I believe it was gratifying to him to know that the wood would be used rather than go to waste. It's beautiful wood. Another relative got it in her mind that she would like to learn to turn wood. She got a 4-foot-long, heavy cast-iron Craftsman lathe and turning tools to go with it, and took some lessons. But the passion did not last, and she gave the equipment to me. So now I have a lathe and turning tools. Uncle Barney was another of my benefactors. He decided that he'd like to build a boat from scratch and purchased the tools of a boat builder. That dream had passed when we visited him in Florida, and he offered me 3 of his power tools, He probably picked them up used himself. One of those tools is the bandsaw that is the topic of this episode. So keep your eyes open and let people know that you would be happy to take their unused tools off their hands. You might think that these relatives had big ideas but no follow-through. But in this way they were like most people, who start a thing, buy the technology, and then fail to follow through. It happens for many reasons, and they stow the machinery forever because, someone might want it. Well, you could be that someone. How many old closeted trombones are fermenting in their brass fumes? How many guitars sit in the corner untuned because I want to get back to it, or someone might want it? Well, you should be that someone. By the way, I am aware that neither you nor I are in that category of craft quitters. You and I follow through and complete every project and master every craft. Incidentally, you think you might have some use for a Cricut die-cutting machine? So anyway, I became the owner of a Craftsman bandsaw, and I had planned to use the thing. I even made a rolling stand for it. But I didn't get a motor for it, and I didn't get a motor for it, and the years went by, as they are wont to do. At one point, I was apparently convinced that I would never use the thing, because I put it out front in a yard sale. But no one bought it, so it sat in the old carriage house. For some time, I've been thinking that a small bandsaw would enhance my miniature work. It's a versatile tool capable of a number of operations, including resawing, but most importantly, cutting curved lines. I like to keep a wide bandsaw blade on my big bandsaw for doing resawing, so the cutting of curved lines is something that's more suited to a smaller bandsaw. Many miniature furniture designs include curved cuts. A dining room chair, for example, that has curved legs is more realistic and more elegant than a ramrod straight chair. So this summer I got a notion and pulled the bandsaw out from behind some lumber and fencing material in the carriage house. In the process, I found my old cobbled-together grinder with the washing machine motor. I looked the saw over, took off the front cover, and decided the time had come to recondition the thing, with the added motivation that it might make a good episode. The saw is a 12-inch, 3-wheel, tilting table Craftsman bandsaw, manufactured by the King Seeley Company of Ypsilanti, Michigan, who made woodworking machines for Craftsman from the 1930s through the 1950s. 12-inch in this context means that it has a 12-inch space between the blade and the frame. This space is called the throat, and it determines the potential width of cut. On a two-wheeled machine with one big wheel over the other, the throat can only be as big as the wheels. My big old Gill-built bandsaw is an 18-inch saw with two 18-inch wheels, so it has an 18-inch throat. 3 wheels arranged in a triangle allow for a deeper throat without having to use huge wheels or turn it into a huge machine. The tilting table feature allows for angled cuts. The table, which is a slab of cast iron, had a heavy coat of rust on it, which is to be expected since it was kept in an unheated space. The saw blade had some light rust, which means it was less sharp than a new one, but I expected the blade to be the easiest thing to replace. I rolled the assembly out to the big boy shop and took it apart down to the last washer. In retrospect, I should have taken 3 or 4 times as many pictures, I was later confused about where some parts came from. The core of the machine is a cast iron frame, shaped like a big C, to which all of the components are bolted. The frame was in good shape, its gray paint was intact, and there were no cracks or flaws. Cast iron never bends. If it is stressed beyond its tolerances, it breaks. That's the difference between cast iron and steel, which is malleable. This frame resists a lot of stress without coming anywhere near failing, and it does so with very little flex or distortion. It is a single casting, all of one piece, with a lot of built-in bracing to make it stiff and rigid. I gave the frame a cleaning in the parts washer, which is one of my motorcycle restoration tools. The legs that hold the frame are pieces of iron that clamp to the cast iron frame and bolt to the platform. They were covered in thick rust, so they were stripped to bare metal using the wire wheel on my grinder and a rotary wire brush in the handheld power drill. They were then painted in the paint booth, another tool of my motorcycle restoration shop. They were painted with rattle can black lacquer because that's what I had on hand, and I like lacquer because it dries relatively quickly, and if there are imperfections they can be sanded out. By the way, if you do a paint job with a rattle can paint and there is significant paint left over, you will want to save it, and sometimes you won't use it for a while. To ensure that it will still be good, turn the can upside down and push the button until it comes out clear. It will take just a second or two. What you did by doing this was to use the propellant in the can to clear the paint out of the nozzle. My BMW motorcycle mechanic Dan Browning told me about that one. Some other mechanical parts of the bandsaw: the blade tensioner and tracking adjustment, the blade guides, the tilt mechanism, were intact but greasy and dirty, so they all went into the parts washer. Then, when clean and dry, I smeared grease on the working surfaces where I could get to them, and applied some 3-in-1 oil in those places I could not get at to apply grease. A word about my chosen grease. Ever since I was 20, when I worked at the East Lansing Bicycle Co-op, I have been a devotee of waterproof bicycle grease, used in bicycle wheel bearings and other moving parts. And I've been using it for a wide variety of situations. I avoided washing the bearings because I didn't want to introduce any grit, which would have been harmful to their health and longevity. And sometimes when you dismantle a needle bearing, it just falls apart in your hands. I left the bearings in their wheels or on their shafts and simply wiped those components down with a rag and some degreasing fluid. Ideally, a full restoration would include replacing those bearings, but I didn't know whether or not I could find new ones, and these felt like they turned smoothly when I spun them. The two idler wheel bearings have little rubber caps, which allow oil to be applied to the needle bearings. This bandsaw came from a different era. When I was young, I drove tractor on the farm to harrow, cultivate, spread manure, and bale hay. Every day started with certain maintenance chores, such as checking the oil in the tractor and greasing whatever machine it was I was going to use. The baler had several dozen grease zerts, nipple-like fittings which mated up with the nozzle of the grease gun and delivered grease directly to the bearings. This bandsaw is from another era. when you would do that kind of start-of-the-day maintenance. These tubes with rubber caps are called oil cups, and they feed oil to the bearing at a controlled rate. An old locomotive or steam tractor would have many of these. This one that we're looking at now is on an even more ancient machine, a combination disc and belt sander, also a gift from Uncle Barney. The main arbor of the bandsaw, the shaft with the belt pulley on one end and the driving wheel for the saw on the other, was firmly attached to its bearing. I didn't attempt to take it off because it seemed to run smoothly with no detectable wobble or vibration. A farmer learns to feel the accumulated wear in their machines. A few thousandths of an inch wear translates into a significant detectable slop, causing vibrations and noises. I have learned through painful experience that there is such a thing as over-restoring. Removing an old bearing can damage that bearing. And if you don't know that you can replace it, you could ruin an otherwise useful tool. The main drive bearing did not have easy access for the application of fresh lubricant, so I dripped some 3-in-1 oil into one end and saw that it seeped down into the bearing itself. There are guides for the blade above and below the table. Each of these guides consist of 2 brass pins on either side of the blade and a little round wheel behind the blade. These keep the blade from twisting or flexing when under load. I filed the faces of the pins so they were flat and smooth, and adjusted them so they just missed the blade. According to an article in Fine Woodworking, this clearance is traditionally set by wrapping a dollar bill around the blade and setting the pins up against the dollar bill. When you remove the bill, there's a tiny gap left, and this sets the clearance at approximately 3/1000ths of an inch. The author of the article suggested using a cigarette paper instead of a dollar bill, which would yield a clearance of 1/1000th of an inch. I bet you never thought you'd be putting cigarette papers on your shopping list for the shop. Or, I don't know, maybe that's exactly what you would do. The guide pins should be next to the flat part of the blade and just behind the teeth, which are set slightly to either side. The small wheel behind the blade runs in its own brass bushing, which adjusts forward and back so the wheel is just short of touching the back of the blade. I smeared a little grease on the shaft of the wheel and on the face of the wheel that contacts the blade. I installed a new cord and plug. I had already installed a switch. This is just a wall switch like you would have in your house, installed in an electric box. So the new cord went into that electric box, and another cord came out from it and is attached to the motor. I turned my attention to the cast iron table. Cast iron is the material of choice for power tool tables. You saw cast iron tables on my table saw and on my jointer. The requirements of a power tool table is that they can be machined to smoothness and flatness at a high level of accuracy, and that they are strong and stable. Your wooden workpiece should glide easily across the table, and the table serves as the reference surface for flat and square. I attempted to remove the rust on the table with a product designed for that purpose. I've successfully used it on my table saw and jointer in the past, but it did not do a good job in this case. It may have lost its effectiveness with age and time spent in a freezing barn, and I may need to buy a new bottle of the stuff. So the rust in this case had to be removed with the wire wheel, which took some time. Once the rust was removed, I cleaned the table with paint prep, which is a liquid which removes all dirt and oils, and every last molecule of the paint prep then evaporates. Then I masked off the top of the table, which needed to be bare, and painted the sides in the paint booth. Then I wiped a protective compound that I had used on other cast iron tables onto the bare iron of the tabletop, and the results were very smooth and looked beautiful. There is a small machine screw embedded in the split in the table, which binds the two sides together, making the table more solid and stable. The split is there to allow for the installation of a new saw blade, which is one continuous band of sharp steel and couldn't be put through the tiny hole in the middle of the table without having that split to slide it in on. A set screw on the bottom of the table set the resting angle at 90 degrees to the blade, an example of the table being our reference surface. The outer cases would look nice if they were repainted, but for now I just washed them down, which made very little difference. At some point I may decide that I do want to paint them, but I think I'll try to find a color that matches the original gray, and I can go back and do that at any time. Those cases come off quite easily. The wheels originally had thin rubber tires mounted on them. These had worn off or rotted off long ago. Rubber used in machines is not very durable. It becomes hard and cracks and doesn't do its job after a while. And Uncle Barney, or somebody, had replaced those rubber tires with 5 or 6 wraps of black electrical tape, a trick that would make a frugal farmer proud. I tried mounting the blade on these, and the blade seemed to stay on track, and these phony rubber tires seem to provide sufficient traction, so for now we will do with what we have. It may be possible to find replacement tires, but my initial efforts to do so failed. I mounted the motor carefully to align the pulleys. I installed a new V-belt and fired her up, and it went the wrong way. The blade went up rather than down. My old washing machine motor turned the wrong way for this application. With some modern electric motors, you can switch the wires inside the connection box and reverse the rotation. Apparently, this reversal of direction is not an option on an old salvaged washing machine motor. I spent some time looking for a new motor, but got discouraged by what seemed like exorbitant prices, like $350 for a 1/3 horsepower motor at Tractor Supply. After some contemplation, I came up with a solution. It's not perfect, but it got the saw operational. I installed a longer motor mount board and reversed the motor body, which in effect reversed the direction of rotation relative to the saw drive pulley. This causes the whole saw to be off balance because the motor is quite heavy and it now hangs off to the side of this narrow frame. It would be easy to tip the thing over. I may add some counterweight to the other side to balance it out, but it works, and that's what matters. It cut a tight curve in a hard piece of cherry like it was carving butter. I was able to find an attachment at Ace Hardware that allows me to connect a vacuum or dust collector. I had to cut a hole in the steel cover, and I fastened the fixture to the cover with metal screws. When starting the bandsaw, the motor jumped rather violently. I added a rod, not to increase the tension, because the weight of the motor does that just fine, but to stop that initial jump. As an anchor for that rod, I installed a platform at the level of the cross braces. This actually turns out to give me a place to put something as a counterweight, or just to store things. The whole assembly looks a little off level to me, so I may add some plywood pads, some shims, to the bottom to straighten it up. I would still like to find a narrower blade to cut sharper curves. I also want to install a gooseneck light to illuminate the work. So, time to go to the woodworker store. But in the meantime, I've gotten this saw in good enough fettle to be used. You will get to see me use the refurbished bandsaw on a miniature project in the future. I should find a project with curves and make this happen soon. In the meantime, keep your eyes peeled for gifts and bargains that can enhance your tooling. Haunt antique malls and yard sales. Let others know that you are a woodworker in search of machines. Become a restorer of old equipment. So until next time, this is David Knight saying, please like me and subscribe. Send me your comments or questions and I will reply. And reminding you to always remember and never forget